Proverbs speaks a lot about the pain that a parent feels when they have a child who does not live life correctly, a child who squanders their life. And we know about the prodigal son and how distressed the father was just by the fact that their son was gone. And obviously the parable of the prodigal son has a different message entirely, but throughout scripture you see just how much distress comes from having a child, a son, a daughter who just refuses to do life correctly. And these are things that sometimes as young people we don't really consider and we don't think of because we are not in our parents' shoes. And I've realized the more I've grown up, I've realized that this is what the pain of having people not understand the burden you carry. We as people are not programmed to empathize or to care for those whose shoes we do not fit or those whose shoes we've never tried on. It's very easy to criticize. So we're focusing tonight on just finding the best way that you as a person's child, as a grandchild, and if you're being raised by your aunt and they are your guardian or by your actual parents, finding the best ways in which you can show support to your parents or guardian. And the reason that I'm opening by saying that or speaking of how the word makes emphasis on how painful it is to have a son or a daughter who does not walk in the way. The reason I open with that is that I believe is one of the best ways that you can support your parents, just by living your life in wisdom and not squandering your life and not being a child or a son who's always out seeking parties, coming home in the wee hours of the morning, going out and committing crime and your parents waking up and finding out that you're arrested. These are some of the most painful things that you can put your parents through, and just being a person who squanders their life in drowning alcoholic beverages and in drugs. Those are some of the worst things you could do. What I would encourage you to do, and this is basically the bare minimum, if we're being honest, the bare minimum is just be a decent human being. That's one of the best ways that you can show support to your guardian, to your parents. It's a very good place to start. That's how I should put it. It's a very good place to start. Start by just by being a decent human being. Live your life in wisdom. Don't squander money. Don't go out looking for trouble. Don't be the child who every time there's trouble being made in the community, your parents have to get up and pack their bags and go and find out if it's not you. They have to be confident that it's not you. They need to be shocked. And I love some of the practical things that Charles mentioned because these are more of the practical small things. I know that my mother and I, just a disclaimer on my part, that I'm not the perfect son. And I love talking about those imperfect aspects of me because I understand that none of us are, and some of us have hurdles that we need to overcome. And the point I'm getting to is this: my mother and I, when it comes to her sending me to do stuff, we don't get along very well because she's really made me become a person who doesn't like being sent. Not necessarily because I don't like being sent for things in general. Right? I will do a lot of things, but I've learned that it really matters to me how I'm sent. And my mother comes from a generation where her parents believed that a child has to do what their parent asks of them. My wish should be your command. That's how the phrase go, your wish is my command. Her parents truly believed that their word is sovereign and you should not disobey. If I say go wash the dishes, you go wash the dishes. If I say you're doing this chore today at this time, you're doing that chore this day at this time. If I say you're looking after your siblings, that's what's going to happen. And a lot of baby boomers come from that generation or that era where their parents didn't care about whether they had homework or not. They didn't care about how they felt. They didn't care whether they had their favorite show that they have to watch or not. And that's where my mother and I clash a lot. And I'm telling you this not to give you the freedom to rebel against such a parent, but I'm telling you this to bring attention to the fact that there are some dynamics that make it very not as easy of a thing to do to just say, oh yes, mom, you want me to wash the car, I'll do it for you. Oh yes, mom, I want to make sure that in this discussion we don't ignore the fact that some relationships between parents and their children are far more complicated than we might think, or far more complicated than we sometimes point them out to be or acknowledge them to be. That's a good way to put it. They are far more complicated than we sometimes acknowledge them to be. In spite of all of that, my mother and I had those clashes, because for her, if she says go make tea and I say no, but I'm busy with this, or I'm feeling this way, or even if it's not even that I'm feeling this way, it's just that I've planned my day in a particular way, and what she's asking of me is out of the way of how I've planned my day. And I don't mean to be rude, but I just mean to express the fact that this is what I've planned to invest my time in today. If I ever were to do that with my mom, then we'd get into a fight. And the point I'm making here is that in spite of all of that, I've always tried to show respect towards my mother. I've always, in fact, it's even something that I pray about, right? Because even though she comes from an approach of my wish should be your command, and that doesn't sit well with me, because what I actually want is, my son, are you able to do this for me? Or my son, I need you to do this. Or another thing that a mistake that parents can make often is the fact that they might not realize that they need to give you notice in advance, for you to do something, especially the older you get, because the older you get as a young person, it matters. Really, really does matter that you take responsibility for your life and you begin to make plans. And because you make plans, now parents need to start telling you in advance that you need to do A and B. The focus of this conversation, even though I'm off-ramping, towards the side of also making the argument that parents are sometimes in the wrong, the point of this discussion is to say, in spite of that, make it an effort to be the bigger man in the relationship, right? Make those minute gestures, perform those what might seem as minute gestures, perform them, Tell your parent that they look good. Ask your parent about how was work. Listen to them when they have a story to tell you about their childhood. I think that's one of the biggest gifts I've been able to give my mother, just being able to sit with her, sip on a cup of tea, and listen to her talk about her childhood, talk about how she was raised by her parents, listen to her dream, talk about how the life she wished she could have lived, and talk about the fun she's had and growing up. There's a lot of things I've been able to pick up with my mother, and I've learned that she's such a human and she's such a woman as well. My mother's very shy. My mother's a person who, when she knows you, she can talk and have a very lengthy conversations with you, but she's very confrontational with us, her children, but in her essence, she's not a confrontational person. So she's not the type of person that you would expect to come to you and say, I don't like the way you're treating me. I don't like the service at the store. She's very, very contained, and she tries to keep her life closed. She's not very social. She's not a person who goes out and socializes. And those are things that I will always remember about my mother. She's still alive, by the way. She makes me laugh, and we have wonderful conversations. And she, I believe, is what connects me and my siblings. And I think as appreciation for her, I'm learning to take my ego out of the picture sometimes, that even when she asks me to do something in a way that I believe she could have done it better, she could have asked me to wash her car better. I remember this one time her and I sort of clashed, and it was because she asked me to wash her car early in the morning while she was going to church. And I was like, Mom, seriously? You could have asked me this on Friday, on Saturday. I wasn't doing nothing. Or you could have let me know in advance that you want your car washed for church in the morning. And we really, really got into loggerheads, right? And I don't like seeing my mother upset. And especially, I don't like my mother asking me for something and me not doing it. So I'm that son that even if my mother asks me to do something in a way that I don't appreciate, or in a tone that I don't appreciate, or even if her and I get into an argument about me doing something for her, I will eventually do it. It's like the scripture says, better the son, when Jesus uses that parable of the son who says, I'll do it, and then he doesn't do it, and then the other son says, I won't do it, but ends up doing it. Better that son, because you understand that their heart is at the right place. After they've said, no, I won't do it, They sit and they think and they process and they understand that you're their parent and that you do a lot for them and you've made many sacrifices for them to get to where they are, and they eventually cave in and they go and get what you ask them to do done, regardless of how they feel about the situation. So that's what I want to encourage you to do. Be the son who, even though you don't like how your parents approached you, be the son or the daughter who will get the job done, who will get the chore done eventually, even though it was through, a grin and you were grinding your teeth and you were not really happy with the way they asked you to do the dishes, but eventually you will do the dishes. And most of all, I'm going to close off by saying this: just be a decent human being. Do the bare minimum. Say please and thank you. Get up in the morning and make your bed and put your shoes where they should be. Whenever you make tea or bread or breakfast, clean up after yourself. Ask those around you, are you well? How are you doing? Don't be the person that parents have to wake up in the middle of the night and be so worried whether you're arrested or whether you're alive. And I know parents who have had to go through that. And what I want to encourage you to do as a young person is don't be that child that a parent has to parent and worry about and be ashamed of and be disgraced by. I want to encourage you to just be a decent human being. And that's one of the greatest gifts you can give to your parents, believe it or not.